I don't care if you're saving the president. You're in my scene now. Get out of the vehicle. The voice was flat, bored, the kind of tired authority that had given up on persuasion years ago. The officer's hand rested on his holster. That was the second thing she noticed. The first was the way his sunglasses reflected the flashing red and blue lights, turning his eyes into twin voids. Dozens of other eyes were on them, a small crowd gathering on the sidewalk, phones rising like small dark birds taking flight. In the back of the ambulance, the rhythmic beep of the cardiac monitor was the only answer she had. It was too fast, dangerously fast. Nurse Sarah Adebayo did not move. She did not look at the officer. She looked at the screen, at the numbers that spelled out a life dissolving second by second. She felt the weight of those eyes, the heat of the officer's impatience. What he didn't know, what none of them could possibly know, was that the life hanging by a thread of electricity and medication belonged to the one man in the city who could end his career with a single phone call. But a phone call would be too late. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The morning had begun with light, the specific quality of 5:30 a.m. light in late September, thin and silver, that slanted through the kitchen window and laid a clean line across the worn oak of the floor. Sarah stood at the counter, her ritual in motion, the grind of the coffee beans, a low, satisfying rumble, the pour of hot water over the grounds, the bloom of steam that smelled of earth and comfort. This was her time, the 30 minutes between waking and the world's demands. She had learned a long time ago that you had to claim your peace before the day tried to steal it. Her father had taught her that. A career army man, he spoke of discipline not as a punishment, but as the architecture of freedom. You build a structure for your life, he'd say, so that when the storm comes, you have a place to stand. Her home was that structure, a small, neat bungalow in a neighborhood of identical houses, made unique by the riot of her mother's rose bushes out front and the quiet dignity within. Photos lined the mantelpiece, her parents on their wedding day, her brother in his Air Force dress uniform, her graduating from nursing school, her face bright with a future she believed in, a future of service. She drank her coffee black, standing by the window, watching the neighborhood wake up, the scrape of a newspaper being picked up from a porch, the distant bark of a dog, the low hum of the first bus of the day. These were the sounds of a world in order, a world she helped maintain. As a senior cardiac nurse, her job was to stand in the breach between order and chaos, between a life continuing and a life ending. She had done it for 22 years. She was good at it. Her composure was not a mask, it was a tool, as vital as a defibrillator or an IV line. At 6:15 a.m., she rinsed her mug, placed it in the dishwasher, and checked her bag. Stethoscope, shears, a spare penlight. Everything in its place. She kissed her father's photograph on the mantel. A small, private gesture. Be good, Dad. She could almost hear his reply. Be ready, Sarah. The drive to the station was quiet. Just the road and the engine and the morning air. She loved this part of the day. The city still stretching, not yet caught in the grip of its own frantic energy. At the station, the familiar rhythm took over. The easy camaraderie with the other paramedics and EMTs. The gallows humor. The shared pot of too strong coffee. She ran the morning checks on Ambulance 7, her rig, oxygen levels, battery charge on the monitor, drug box inventory. Every vial counted, every seal intact. It was a machine of second chances, and it had to be perfect. Her partner, a young, eager EMT named Leo, read the checklist back to her. His energy was a bright contrast to her deliberate calm. Everything's green, Sarah, he grinned, ready to save the world. She gave a small, rare smile. Just the one patient at a time, Leo. The first few hours were routine. A lift assist for an elderly woman who'd slipped in her bathroom, a diabetic feeling faint at a bus stop, the quiet hum of the city, the steady pulse of its ordinary needs. Then, at 11:42 a.m., the call came. The kind of call that made the air in the cab go still. Unit 7, respond code 3. Unresponsive male, mid-60s. Possible cardiac event. City Hall, mayor's office. Leo looked at her, his eyes wide. The mayor? Sarah was already pulling the rig into traffic, the siren beginning its urgent, rising cry. She didn't answer. Her focus had narrowed, mid-60s, unresponsive, cardiac event. The name and title were just data points, irrelevant to the medicine. In the back of the ambulance, every patient was the same. A body, a set of vitals, a puzzle to be solved against a ticking clock. They arrived in 4 minutes. City Hall was a controlled panic. Aides with pale faces pointed them toward the grand oak doors of the mayor's office. Inside, Mayor Thompson was on the floor, his face a waxy gray. His chief of staff was performing CPR, her compressions clumsy but determined. Sarah took over without breaking stride. "Leo, get the monitor on him. I need a line, now." Her hands were a blur of efficient motion. Pads on the chest. IV catheter sliding into a vein in the back of his hand. She assessed the rhythm on the screen. Ventricular fibrillation, a chaotic, useless quivering of the heart. "He's in V-fib. Charging to 200, she announced to the room, her voice cutting through the fear. "Leo, clear." "Clear," he echoed. The machine whined, and she pressed the orange button. The mayor's body arched off the floor, a single violent jolt. Then it fell back. She looked at the monitor. Still V-fib. No change. Resuming compressions. Push one of EPI. This was the dance. The brutal, intimate choreography of resuscitation. Compressions, drugs, shocks. A battle fought in 30-second increments. They got him onto the gurney, the Lucas device taking over compressions with perfect mechanical rhythm. They were moving, a bubble of intense focus rolling through the panicked halls of power. "We need to go, now," Sarah said, her eyes locked on the monitor. They had a pulse back. Weak, thready, but it was there. His blood pressure was perilously low. "He's trying to code again. I'm starting a dopamine drip." Down the elevator, through the marble lobby, and out into the jarring brightness of the day. They loaded him into the back of Ambulance 7. Leo jumped into the driver's seat. Sarah didn't even have time to close the door properly before they were moving, siren screaming. She was titrating the drip, watching the numbers, her entire world compressed into the 6 by 10 foot box. The pressure was a physical thing, a weight on her chest. But her hands were steady. Her mind was clear. They were less than a mile from University Hospital, maybe 3 minutes out, when the world outside the ambulance intruded. Leo's voice, tight with disbelief, came over the intercom. "Sarah, we're being pulled over." She looked up from the drip line, confused. It didn't register. Cops don't pull over an ambulance running code 3. It doesn't happen. But through the back window, she could see them. The flashing lights of a police cruiser, insistent, right on their tail. "What for?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I have no idea," Leo said, his voice cracking. "He's on the bullhorn. He wants me to stop." "Don't you dare stop," Sarah commanded. "We have a critical patient. Radio dispatch. Tell them we have a police cruiser attempting to stop us during a transport and we are not stopping." The cruiser swerved aggressively in front of them, forcing Leo to slam on the brakes. The gurney shifted and a bag of saline swung wildly. The patient's blood pressure, which had just started to climb, dipped again. An alarm began to chirp on the monitor. Sarah felt a surge of cold fury, not hot rage. Something colder, more precise. This was not just an interruption. This was an assault on her patient, on her duty. A man in a police uniform was out of his car and stalking toward the driver's side door. He was yelling, his face contorted. Sarah couldn't hear the words, but she could read the language of his body. It was the language of dominance. She hit the intercom button. "Leo, stay in the cab. Do not engage him. Your job is to be ready to drive the second I get rid of him." She moved to the side door of the ambulance, her movements deliberate. She cracked it open just enough to speak, her body still shielding her patient. The officer was there, his face inches from hers. His name tag read, Miller. "What is the meaning of this, officer?" she asked, her voice level, professional. "License and registration," he clipped, not looking at her, but past her, into the ambulance. His eyes were hidden behind the sunglasses, but she could feel the dismissive sweep of his gaze. "Officer, this is an ambulance. We are in the middle of a critical cardiac transport to University Hospital. The patient is unstable. We cannot stop." Miller took a step closer, his presence filling the small opening of the door. The smell of stale coffee and something metallic, like old pennies, wafted from him. He was crowding her space, a classic intimidation tactic. She didn't move back. I clocked you doing 55 and a 35, he said, his voice low and gravelly. You think those lights give you a pass to break the law? Sarah stared at him. The sheer absurdity of it was breathtaking. It was a question so divorced from reality, from protocol, from common sense, that it couldn't be answered directly. It wasn't a real question. It was an assertion of power. Officer, state law allows emergency vehicles to exceed the speed limit when responding to a call. We have an actively dying man in this vehicle. His heart is failing. Every second we are sitting here, his chance of survival decreases. You are obstructing emergency medical care. She kept her tone even, pedagogical, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. Miller's jaw tightened. A small muscle jumped in his cheek. He didn't like being lectured. He leaned in further. I'm the one who decides what's an emergency out here. And right now, the emergency is an unregistered vehicle driving recklessly. I ran the plate. It came back with an expired registration. Sarah felt a flicker of disbelief. The city fleet department handled registrations. It was possible there was a clerical error, but it was irrelevant. That is a clerical issue for the city to handle, officer. It is not grounds to stop a life-saving transport. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to get back to my patient. She made to close the door. His hand shot out, grabbing the edge, stopping it. The metal was cold under his palm. You're not going anywhere, he said. The bored tone was gone, replaced by something sharp and ugly. I need to see your identification. And his? He gestured toward Leo. We are medical personnel in the performance of our duties. Our identification is on our uniforms, Sarah said, pointing to her name badge. Sarah Adebayo, RN, cardiac specialist. Now, move your vehicle. That was when he looked at her. Really looked at her? He took in her face, her dark skin, her calm, unyielding expression. Something moved behind his eyes. A shift, a decision. It was the moment the interaction stopped being about a traffic violation and became about something else entirely. I'm going to tell you one more time, he said, his voice dropping to that register of performative menace. Get out of the ambulance. The cardiac monitor let out a long, piercing tone, a flat line. He's coding, Sarah yelled, turning from the door. She grabbed the defibrillator paddles. Leo, get back here. She ignored Miller, ignored the open door. There was only the patient, only the flat line on the screen. She charged the paddles. Clear. Before she could press the button, a hand clamped down on her shoulder. It was hard, bruising. Miller was in the ambulance with her. I gave you an order, he snarled in her ear. Get your hands off me, she shouted, her voice finally breaking its professional shell. I have to shock this man. He is dying. He didn't listen. He was fueled by the affront to his authority. He wrenched her arm back, spinning her away from the patient, away from the controls. The paddles clattered to the floor. Her body slammed against the wall of the ambulance. The world tilted, a confusing kaleidoscope of flashing lights and the smell of antiseptic. You are under arrest for interfering with a police officer, Miller grunted, pulling her arms behind her back with practiced, painful efficiency. Leo was scrambling into the back. What are you doing? Stop. He's flatlining. Miller ignored him. He was focused on Sarah, on subduing her. The cold metal of handcuffs bit into her wrists. The click of the ratchet was the loudest sound in the world. He was dragging her, pulling her out of the ambulance and into the harsh daylight. She stumbled on the step, her knee hitting the pavement. A sharp, searing pain shot up her leg. A crowd had gathered now. Phones were out, recording. She could see their faces, a mixture of shock, confusion, and fear. A young woman, no older than 20, stood frozen on the corner, her phone held steady, her eyes wide with horror. That was Maya, the witness. Her gaze met Sarah's for a fraction of a second. Don't look away, Sarah thought. Bear witness to this. Miller pushed her against the side of the ambulance, the hot metal searing through her uniform shirt. You should have listened, he breathed, his voice laced with a grim satisfaction. He was performing for the crowd now, establishing his dominance. The patient, Sarah said, her voice strained, the words scraping her throat. His name is Mayor Thompson. You are killing the mayor of this city. She saw the flicker of doubt in his posture, the slight hesitation. But it was too late for him to back down. His pride was committed. Another officer, his partner, was holding Leo back, keeping him from the patient. "Nice try," Miller scoffed, but the confidence was gone from his voice. He patted her down. A rough, humiliating search on the side of a busy street. He found nothing. A pen, a pair of shears, her stethoscope. He threw them on the ground. "Get her in the car," he barked at his partner. As they forced her into the back of the cruiser, she saw another ambulance finally arriving, summoned by a panicked Leo. The new team was rushing toward Ambulance 7. 9 minutes. That's how long Miller had held them there. 9 minutes of no compressions, no shocks, no medication. In the world of cardiac arrest, 9 minutes was an eternity. It was the space between life and brain death. The door of the cruiser slammed shut, sealing her in a world of plexiglass and the smells of cheap air freshener. She watched as they finally moved Mayor Thompson to the new ambulance and sped away. Its siren, a fading scream. She leaned her head against the hot glass of the window and closed her eyes. She let herself feel it. The searing humiliation. The rage, cold and deep as a glacier. The profound violation, not just of her body, but of her oath. She allowed herself to feel it for exactly 60 seconds. She counted them off in her head, one breath at a time. 1, 2, 3. Then the feeling was put away, stored. It was no longer an emotion. It was fuel. He had learned a long time ago that the system was a machine, not a broken machine, a machine that worked exactly as it was designed to. It was designed to protect itself, to grind down challengers, to exhaust complainants, to turn victims into obstacles. Officer Miller was a gear in that machine, and now so was she. The ride to the precinct was silent. Miller drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The silence was thick with his victory. Sarah sat in the back, her hands cuffed painfully behind her, and she focused on her breathing. In, out. A steady rhythm. She was no longer a nurse saving a patient. She was evidence, a witness to her own assault. At the 4th precinct, he led her through a side door, avoiding the main entrance. The booking area was a drab beige room that smelled of sweat and disinfectant. He uncuffed one of her hands, chained it to a metal loop on a bench, and walked away without a word. She sat, and she waited. The minutes stretched into an hour. Officers walked by, some glancing at her with curiosity, others with a practiced indifference. No one spoke to her. No one asked her what happened. They knew the story already. The story Miller was writing in his report. She was the belligerent woman who had interfered, the aggressive suspect who had to be subdued. It was a simple, clean narrative. The machine was already at work, processing her, labeling her, filing her away. After an hour and 20 minutes, a different officer, a sergeant with a weary face and a thick mustache, came over. "I'm Sergeant Riley. We need your information." Sarah looked at him. "I want to speak to my lawyer." Riley sighed, a long put-upon sound. "Look, lady, just give us your name and we can get this over with." "My name is Sarah Adebayo. I am a registered nurse. I was forcibly removed from my ambulance during a life-saving procedure by one of your officers. My patient was the mayor. I will not say another word until I have spoken to my lawyer." She stated the facts calmly. No anger, no pleading, just the facts. The mention of the mayor made Riley pause. He looked back toward the squad room, a flicker of uncertainty on his face. He knew Miller. He knew his reputation, but he also knew the code. You back your own. "Fine. You get one phone call," he said, his tone dismissive. He uncuffed her and led her to a phone on a scarred metal desk. She dialed a number she knew by heart. Her father answered on the second ring. "Dad," she said, her voice steady. "I'm at the 4th precinct. I've been arrested. I need you to call John." John was her brother's old friend from law school, a quiet, methodical man who now worked for a civil rights firm downtown. There was a pause on the other end of the line. She could hear her father's controlled breathing, the discipline kicking in. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't explode with rage. He processed. Then he acted. "I'm on my way, Sarah," he said, his voice a low rumble of absolute certainty. "John is on his way. Do not say a word to anyone." "I won't," she said. "Dad, I'm okay." "I know you are," he replied, and the simple faith in his voice was more comforting than any platitude. They just made a very big mistake. She hung up and was led to a small windowless holding cell. The door clanged shut, the sound echoing in the small space. It was designed to make you feel small, powerless, alone. But Sarah was not alone. She had her father, she had John, and somewhere in the city there was a young woman named Maya with a video on her phone. And in a hospital room, if he was still alive, there was a mayor who owed her his life. The machine was powerful, but it wasn't perfect. It had gears and levers, and if you knew which ones to pull, you could make it run in reverse. She sat on the cold, concrete bench and began to count again. Not seconds this time. She counted the steps they would need to take, the calls they would need to make, the evidence they would need to gather. She was building a new structure in her mind, not of peace this time, of justice. 2 hours later, John arrived. He was exactly as she remembered him, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, his face calm and serious. He projected an aura of quiet competence that immediately changed the atmosphere in the precinct. The officers who had ignored her now watched him with a wary respect. He met with her in a small private room. He didn't ask for the emotional story. He asked for the facts. Start from the beginning, Sarah. Just the facts. What you saw, what you said, what he did. She recounted the events with the same precision she would use to chart a patient's medical history. The time, the location, the patient's vitals. Miller's words, the flat line on the monitor, the feel of his hand on her shoulder, the click of the cuffs. John listened, his pen scratching across a legal pad. He didn't interrupt. When she was finished, he looked up, his eyes dark with a controlled anger. They charged you with obstruction of governmental administration and resisting arrest, he said. Miller's report claims you became physically aggressive when he attempted to cite your driver for reckless endangerment. Sarah stared at him. The lie was so blatant, so complete. Leo wasn't reckless. He was driving to the hospital, and I never touched Officer Miller. I know, John said, and we're going to prove it. He tapped his pen on the pad. Your father told me about the mayor. I've already made a call to his chief of staff's office. He's in surgery. It's bad, Sarah. The doctors are saying the 9-minute delay was critical. A cold knot formed in Sarah's stomach. This was her deepest fear. Not the arrest, not the humiliation. The consequences for her patient. But there's something else, John continued, leaning forward. Your father got a call from a man named Henderson, an old family friend apparently. Said he saw your name on a neighborhood watch email chain about the arrest. Said he has something for you. Something about Officer Miller. Mr. Henderson? Sarah remembered him from her childhood. A quiet, kind man who worked as a paramedic for 30 years before retiring. He lived 2 blocks over from her father. What could he have? He didn't say, John said. Just that he's been waiting for a long time for someone like you. Someone they couldn't just dismiss. They released her 3 hours later. The charges were still pending. She was suspended from duty, her badge and credentials confiscated. She walked out of the precinct into the late afternoon sun, blinking. The world looked different. Sharper, colder. Her father was waiting for her, parked across the street. He got out of the car as she approached. He didn't hug her. He just looked at her, his eyes searching her face. He saw the bruise forming on her knee, the red marks on her wrists. His jaw set, a hard, unforgiving line. Let's go home, Sarah, he said, his voice quiet. The drive home was silent. When they walked through the door, the house felt the same, but she was different. The silver light of morning seemed a lifetime ago. She stood in the middle of the living room, the familiar comfort of the space suddenly feeling alien. Her father went into the kitchen. She heard the familiar sounds, the clink of a mug, the pour of water. He came back with a cup of tea, sweet and milky, just the way her mother used to make it for her when she was sick. He put it in her hands. Her fingers were trembling slightly. They did this to the wrong person, he said. It wasn't a comfort. It was a statement of fact, a declaration of war. Later that evening, after she had showered and changed, the doorbell rang. It was Mr. Henderson. He was older than she remembered, his back a little more stooped, but his eyes were as clear and sharp as ever. He carried a worn cardboard banker's box, held together with duct tape. Sarah, he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. I was so sorry to hear what happened, but I can't say I was surprised. He came inside and set the box on the dining room table. The quiet before the storm had ended. Now the storm had arrived. "What is this, Mr. Henderson?" Sarah asked, her hand resting on the dusty lid. "I call it the Miller file," he said, pulling up a chair. Her father joined them, placing a protective hand on Sarah's shoulder. "I was a paramedic for 35 years, Sarah. I saw a lot of things. Most cops are good people doing a tough job, but some are bullies with a badge. Miller is one of them." He opened the box. It was filled with dozens of manila folders, each neatly labeled with a date. The box of evidence. It was real. "I started this about 10 years ago, mister," Henderson explained, his voice low and steady. "After Miller pulled over my rig for running a stop sign while we were transporting a kid who was having a seizure. He held us up for 15 minutes arguing. The kid aspirated. He survived, but he had complications. Miller's report said we were driving erratically. The department cleared him. Sound familiar?" Sarah nodded, a cold dread creeping up her spine. "Mister." Henderson pulled out a folder. "This is from 2014, a domestic violence call. Miller got there, decided the woman was hysterical, and refused to let the EMTs treat her. She had a broken rib that punctured her lung. He told her to walk it off. She almost died." He pulled out another. 2016, a car accident. Miller wouldn't let the fire department use the jaws of life on a car because it was part of a crime scene. The driver bled out while he was securing the perimeter. The driver was a black kid. His car matched the description of one used in a robbery a mile away. It was the wrong car. Folder after folder. Each one a story of arrogance, of cruelty, of a man who saw citizens not as people to be protected, but as irritants in his domain. There were handwritten notes, copies of dispatch logs he'd gotten from friends, newspaper clippings, and notarized statements from other paramedics and EMTs who were too afraid to come forward officially. "Why didn't you ever," Sarah began, her voice trailing off, "go to internal affairs?" Mr. Henderson finished with a sad smile. "I did, twice. They opened a file, interviewed me, and concluded that Officer Miller acted within departmental guidelines. The machine protecting its own. They told me I was becoming a problem, that my own career could be at risk. I had a family to support. So I stopped talking to them. But I never stopped collecting." He looked at Sarah, his gaze intense. "But you, Sarah, you are different. You are a respected nurse. You have a spotless record. And your patient is the mayor. They can't bury this. They can't dismiss you. You're the one who can finally make them listen." As he spoke, John's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, his expression shifting. "It's from a source I can't name," he said, turning the phone so Sarah and her father could see. "It's a video." He pressed play. It was the scene from that afternoon, filmed from the corner. The quality was shaky but clear. It showed everything. It showed Sarah, calm and professional at the ambulance door. It showed Miller's escalating aggression. It showed him yanking her out, her knee hitting the ground. It showed the handcuffs, the search, the cold satisfaction on his face. It was all there, undeniable. "The girl who filmed it," John said. "Her name is Maya. She's a college student. She was terrified, but she sent it to a local news outlet's tip line. It's already on their website. It's everywhere." Sarah watched herself being manhandled, her body thrown against the ambulance. The humiliation was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. A flicker of hope. A weapon had just been delivered into their hands. The video was the spark. The news cycle, a creature of insatiable appetite, seized it. By morning, "Nurse arrested, mayor's life at risk," was the headline on every local news channel, every paper, every blog. The shaky footage shot by Maya was playing on a loop, a stark, damning visual. The police department's initial response was predictable. A spokesperson for Chief Davis issued a curt statement. "The incident is under review. Officer Miller is a decorated officer who was responding to a reckless vehicle. We ask the public to reserve judgment until all the facts are known." But the facts were already known. They were in the video. The public saw a black nurse, calm and professional, being assaulted by a white police officer while she was trying to save a life. The narrative Miller had tried to write was being erased and rewritten by the truth. Calls flooded the mayor's office. The city council, the police department. The story was no longer local. National news outlets had picked it up. The machine was starting to shake. Inside the 4th precinct, the atmosphere was tense. Officer Miller walked in for his shift to a wall of silence. His usual morning banter with colleagues died on his lips. They had all seen the video. They had seen him throw a nurse's stethoscope on the ground. They had seen his face, twisted with rage. Some looked away in shame. Others, his staunchest allies, gave him tight, worried nods. They knew what was coming. His partner, Officer Kent, the one who had held Leo back, approached him by the lockers. "They're going to throw you to the wolves, man," Kent whispered, his eyes darting around nervously. "They can't," Miller snarled, slamming his locker shut. "I filed the report. She was obstructive. The chief has my back." "Does he?" Kent asked. "The mayor is still in the ICU. They're saying he might have permanent brain damage from the delay. The mayor, Mike, this isn't some junkie we held up. This is the guy who signs the city's budget." There wasn't fear in Miller's eyes. Not yet. It was indignation. He had done his job. He had asserted his authority. How could he be the one in trouble? In his mind, Sarah Adebayo was still the one at fault. She hadn't complied. Simple as that. Meanwhile, in a quiet law office downtown, the counterattack was being orchestrated with methodical precision. John had been on the phone since dawn. He'd spoken with the district attorney's office, which was suddenly very interested in reviewing the charges against Sarah. He'd spoken with the hospital's legal team, who were preparing a massive civil suit against the city and the police department, and he had taken a call from a young officer, an Officer Chen, the insider. Chen had been on the scene, one of the backup officers who arrived as Sarah was being put in the cruiser. He was young, idealistic, and what he saw had shaken him to his core. He told John about the discrepancy between what he witnessed and what was in Miller's official report. He spoke of a culture in the precinct, fostered by Miller and a few others, of us versus them. He had the internal affairs file number for one of Mr. Henderson's old complaints. He had the name of another officer who had been disciplined for questioning Miller's tactics a year ago. He was quiet, nervous, but determined. He was risking his career. He was breaking the blue wall of silence. "This man gives all of us a bad name," Chen had said, his voice tight. "This has to stop." At her father's house, Sarah watched the news reports, her face a stoic mask. Each time the video played, she felt a fresh wave of the violation, but she pushed it down. This was not about her feelings anymore. This was about accountability. Her father sat with her, a silent, powerful presence. He made her breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and another cup of tea. He talked about his garden, about the squirrels stealing his tomatoes. He was grounding her in the normalcy of life, reminding her of the world outside the storm. At 10 a.m., John called. "Sarah, are you sitting down?" "I am. The U.S. Attorney's Office just called me. They've opened a federal civil rights investigation. They're sending an agent from the Department of Justice to meet with us this afternoon. Her name is Agent Ramirez." Sarah closed her eyes. The Department of Justice. This had escalated beyond the city, beyond the local police department and its self-protecting machine. This was a different level of power, a level that Chief Davis and Officer Miller could not control. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means they're not just looking at your arrest anymore," John said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "They're looking at a pattern of behavior. They're looking at Officer Miller, at the 4th Precinct, at Chief Davis, and his entire department. Mr. Henderson's box of evidence just became Exhibit A in a federal case. The professional ally had arrived. The doorbell rang at 2 p.m. sharp. Agent Ramirez did not look like a federal agent from the movies. She was a compact woman in her 40s, dressed in a simple pantsuit, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She carried a single leather briefcase, but her eyes, dark and intelligent, missed nothing. They swept the room, cataloging the family photos, the worn armchair, the stack of books on the coffee table. They were the eyes of a person who understood that stories lived in details. She shook Sarah's hand. Her grip was firm, her hand cool. "Miss Adebayo, I'm Agent Ramirez. Thank you for seeing me." She greeted Sarah's father and John with the same direct, professional courtesy. There was no small talk. She sat on the edge of the sofa, opened her briefcase, and took out a tablet. I want you to know that the full weight of the Department of Justice is behind this investigation, she began, her voice calm and measured. We are not here to mediate. We are here to enforce federal law, specifically Title 18, Section 242 of the U.S. Code, which makes it a crime for anyone acting under color of law to willfully deprive a person of their rights. She looked directly at Sarah. What Officer Miller did to you was not just a violation of police procedure. It was a potential federal crime. What his department may have done to cover it up is another. For the next 2 hours, she guided Sarah through her testimony again. Her questions were precise, clinical, stripping away emotion to get to the bedrock of fact. She was less like a cop and more like a surgeon, methodically dissecting the event. She recorded everything. Then she turned to Mr. Henderson's box, which sat on the coffee table. John had already scanned and digitized every document. Mr. Henderson's archive is invaluable, Ramirez said, swiping through the files on her tablet. It establishes a clear pattern of conduct. This isn't about one bad traffic stop. This is about a systemic failure of accountability over a decade or more. With this, and with Officer Chen's testimony from inside the department, we have a clear path forward. She looked at Sarah, and for the first time, a hint of something other than professional duty entered her voice. It was a quiet, fierce conviction. People like Officer Miller count on their victims being powerless, she said. They count on them being alone, being too tired or too scared to fight back. They count on the machine to protect them. They never imagined they would run into someone like you, Ms. Adebayo. They never imagined that all the people they harmed over the years would have an advocate in a quiet old paramedic who kept receipts. They never imagined that a scared college student would have the courage to hold up her phone. You are not alone in this. The statement landed with the weight of a promise, the kind of promise backed by the full authority of the United States government. As Agent Ramirez was leaving, her phone rang. She listened for a moment, her expression unreadable. I see, she said. Thank you. She hung up and looked at John. That was the DA's office. They have dropped all charges against Miss Adebayo, effective immediately. Sarah felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled her knees. Her father's hand was on her shoulder again, a steady anchor. And, Ramirez continued, a grim line to her mouth, my office is preparing a warrant for the arrest of Officer Michael Miller for deprivation of rights under color of law. We'll be executing it tomorrow morning. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been inverted. The gear that was Officer Miller, once a driving force in the machine of injustice, was about to be ground to pieces by a much, much larger one. The hunter was now the hunted. The next morning the light was different. Not the thin, silver piece of the day before, but a hard, clear light that seemed to promise clarity. Sarah was in her father's kitchen, the smell of coffee once again filling the air, but the ritual felt different. It was no longer about finding peace, but about preparing for what was to come. At 8:05 a.m., a convoy of black sedans pulled up to the 4th Precinct. They moved with a quiet federal efficiency that was unnerving to the local officers watching from the windows. Agent Ramirez stepped out of the lead car, followed by 4 other agents in tactical vests that read FBI in bold yellow letters. They did not enter through the side door. They walked through the main entrance, their footsteps echoing on the worn linoleum floors. The morning chatter of the precinct died instantly. Every eye was on them. Chief Davis, his face pale and puffy, met them in the middle of the squad room. Agent Ramirez, this is highly irregular. If you have business with one of my officers, you can go through my office. He was trying to assert his authority, to maintain the fiction that this was still his kingdom. Ramirez didn't break stride. She handed him a thick document. This is a federal warrant for the arrest of Officer Michael Miller. And this, she handed him another, is a federal warrant for the seizure of all records, digital and physical, pertaining to any and all internal affairs complaints filed against him over the last 12 years, as well as all emails and internal communications from your office regarding the arrest of Nurse Sarah Adebayo. Davis stared at the warrants as if they were venomous snakes. The color drained from his face. This was a coup, a hostile takeover of his precinct. Now, Ramirez said, her voice cutting through the silent room, where's Officer Miller? Miller was by his locker, just as he had been the day before. He had heard the commotion, seen the black cars. He stood frozen, the bravado he'd shown to his partner now completely gone. He looked small. A bully stripped of his power is just a coward. Two of the FBI agents approached him. They did not shout. They did not posture. "Michael Miller," one said, his voice a calm monotone. "You are under arrest for violation of federal law." Miller looked from the agents to Chief Davis, his eyes pleading for help, for the protection the machine had always promised him. But Davis couldn't even meet his gaze. The chief was staring at the warrant in his hand, seeing not just the end of Miller's career, but the potential end of his own. The agents turned Miller around and cuffed his hands behind his back. The click of the ratchet echoed in the squad room, the same sound Sarah had heard in the back of her ambulance. They used the same model of cuffs. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. They walked him through the center of the room, past the stunned faces of his colleagues. The men he had bullied, the rookies he had hazed, the partners who had enabled him. They all watched as the invincible Mike Miller was led away like a common criminal. As they passed the booking desk, Sergeant Riley, the weary officer who had processed Sarah, looked down at his paperwork, refusing to watch. He knew. They all knew. This was more than one man's arrest. This was the system turning on itself. They put him in the back of one of the black sedans. Through the tinted window, he could see the news vans that had already gathered outside, their cameras like the eyes of predators. The story of the heroic cop was dead. The story of the disgraced officer was just beginning. Back inside, Ramirez turned to Chief Davis. "My team will be here for some time, Chief. I suggest you make yourself available. We have a lot to talk about." Her tone left no room for argument. The reckoning had begun. It was not loud or explosive. It was quiet, methodical, and inescapable. It was the sound of a carefully built case file closing, of warrants being served, of a long overdue bill finally coming due. For Sarah, the news came via text from John. "They have him." She was sitting at her father's dining table, Mr. Henderson's empty box in front of her. She read the text and felt not joy, not triumph, just a profound, quiet sense of rightness. The arc of the moral universe, she thought, was long, but today it had bent decisively toward justice. Her father came and stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder. "It's over," he said softly. "No," Sarah replied, looking up at him. "It's just the beginning." She knew the arrest was only the first step. The real fight was for systemic change, to ensure this never happened to anyone else. The machine hadn't been destroyed, but it had been shown that it could be beaten. The fallout was swift and brutal. The federal investigation, armed with a decade of documented abuses from Mr. Henderson's files and the damning internal testimony from Officer Chin, tore through the 4th Precinct. 2 other officers were suspended for their roles in past cover-ups. Sergeant Riley took an early retirement. Chief Davis held on for another week. He held a disastrous press conference where he tried to paint Miller as a lone, bad apple, a phrase that was met with derision from the assembled press, who were armed with questions drawn directly from Mr. Henderson's files. 2 days after that press conference, facing a no-confidence vote from the city council and immense public pressure, Chief Davis resigned. His career, built on protecting the machine, had been consumed by it. Officer Miller, facing a federal indictment that carried a sentence of up to 10 years, took a plea bargain. He pleaded guilty to the civil rights charge, admitting he had willfully deprived Sarah of her rights. As part of the deal, he surrendered his law enforcement certification, ensuring he could never be a police officer anywhere in the country again. At his sentencing, he stood before the judge and gave a mumbled, court-mandated apology. He never once looked at Sarah, who sat in the front row with her father. She hadn't come for an apology. She had come to bear witness to the final act of accountability. The judge sentenced him to 18 months in federal prison. The city settled with Sarah for an undisclosed but reportedly substantial sum. She donated a large portion of it to a new foundation she established, the Adebayo Initiative for Accountability, dedicated to providing legal support for victims of police misconduct and funding de-escalation training programs. The biggest changes came from the mayor's office. Mayor Thompson, after a long and difficult recovery, emerged from the hospital a changed man. He had a slight tremor in his left hand and a new steely resolve in his eyes. He had been a victim of the same systemic failure he was supposed to oversee. He owed his life to Sarah, and he knew it. His first act upon returning to work was to sign an executive order, co-authored by John, Sarah, and a panel of community leaders. It was called the Duty to Aid Protocol. It made it a fireable offense for any police officer to interfere with or delay emergency medical personnel in the performance of their duties. It mandated cross-agency training between the police and fire departments, and it established a new, independent civilian oversight board with the power to investigate and discipline officers, a board to which he appointed Mr. Henderson as one of its first members. The machine had not been destroyed, but it had been significantly redesigned. New gears were in place. Levers of accountability now existed where there had been none before. Weeks turned into months. The seasons changed. The city healed. The story of Sarah Adebayo became a local legend, a cautionary tale for those in power and a story of hope for those without it. One crisp autumn afternoon, 6 months after the incident, Sarah was back in an ambulance. Ambulance 7. It gleamed. Freshly washed, the city registration sticker new and valid in the window. Her partner was a new EMT, a young woman who looked at Sarah with a quiet awe. A call came in, chest pains, an address downtown. As they pulled into traffic, sirens on, Sarah realized the route was taking them down the same street where Miller had pulled them over. She looked out the window. The corner where Maya had stood filming was just a corner now. The spot where she had knelt in handcuffs was just a patch of asphalt. The memory was there, a faint scar on the landscape of the city, but it no longer had power over her. It was just a place, a thing that had happened. They arrived at the patient's location, treated him, and transported him to the hospital without incident. It was a routine call, the kind of beautiful, boring routine call she had built her life around. That evening, she went to her father's house for dinner. He had made her favorite, a rich stew that filled the small house with the smell of home. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that exists between two people who understand each other completely. After dinner, she stood by the mantelpiece looking at the photos, her mother and father, her brother, her own smiling face at graduation. She touched the frame of her father's military portrait. He came and stood beside her. "Are you okay, Sarah?" he asked, his voice soft. She looked at the reflection of her own face in the glass, older now, the lines around her eyes a little deeper, but her gaze was steady, unshakable. "I am," she said, and it was the truth. The humiliation was gone, replaced by a quiet, hard-won peace. The rage was gone, transmuted into purpose. She had faced the worst of the system and had not been broken. She had been underestimated and disrespected, and she had responded not with rage, but with precision. She had won. More importantly, she had created change. "You were ready," her father said, a note of immense pride in his voice. Sarah nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "I was ready." She looked out the window at the darkening street. The world was still full of challenges, of injustices big and small. But tonight, in this quiet house, surrounded by the love and discipline that had forged her, there was peace. A reflective peace, earned not just for herself, but for the countless others whose stories were in Mr. Henderson's box, and for the countless more who would now have a better chance because of what she did. The light from the street lamp cast a gentle glow into the room, and for the first time in a long time, it felt just like the clean, promising light of morning. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.